The Border Wars, or Federation-Cardassian War, is alluded to several times in Star Trek and a major factor in shaping future events, from the formation of the Marquis to characters like Miles O'Brien and Edward Jellicoe. The Cardassian skirmishes had a major impact. The Federation had been aware of the Cardassians for some time, prior to the 24th century, having seen them clash with the Klingon Empire and even Starfleet already. The Cardassian military complex is well known as authoritarian and overreaching, so much that it effectively turned the Cardassian Union into a militant state. This came about due to the industrial pollution and a degraded quality of life caused by prolonged mishandling of their planet, colonies and resources from their government, until in the late 23rd century a coup placed the army in charge. Through the imposition of strict control methods and policing of rights, they managed to walk back disaster, but at the cost of creating a society of propaganda and a lack of freedoms. However, their new system demanded resources, and after converting so much of their system towards utilitarianism and military power, they found themselves lacking in resources, development and agriculture systems, which led to a very military decision that if they could not find these needs at home, they would need to expand into other territory and force others into supplying them. The occupation of Bajor began in 2309. While not the occupation itself, their expansion is something that eventually brought them into conflict with the United Federation of Planets, which at the time was also expanding its horizons, albeit through exploration. However, regardless of motivation, other powers often see the encroaching Starfleet as nothing more than another aggressor. This view is understandable when you look at the neighbouring powers that Cardassia had to deal with. To the north, you had the Zenkethi Coalition, and to the south was the Talarian Republic. Both of these powers are xenophobic and pride themselves on battle. To the west was the Breen Imperium, which often conducted raids on its surrounding borders, practicing the saying that the best defence is a good offence. Further out was the equally mystifying and confrontational Tholian Assembly. When surrounded by such others, it's no wonder that the Cardassians pushed east into UFP space. Now their initial burst of development led to the creation of ships like the Galor class, but they did not manage to continue their innovation, with Starfleet eventually outpacing them in terms of technology by the late 24th century. Tensions between the UFP and Cardassia pretty much existed from the start, with even the initial talks in 2327 from Starfleet being used by Cardassia to instigate disruption between the UFP and Ligara, a planet which the Cardassian Union had its eyes on. The actual dates of the war are somewhat fuzzy in canon, with even apocryphal dates failing to exactly create a proper timeline of events. This means that the border conflict is basically a term used to denote a series of prolonged battles involving the Cardassians from 2347 through to 2366, rather than alluding to a single theatre of war such as the Dominion War was. In 2344, the USS Memphis was attacked by a Cardassian ship when near their space, resulting in the loss of the tactical officer, and Lieutenant Edward Jellicoe took her place and managed to devise a battle plan to drive off the aggressors. In 2347, the USS Rutledge NCC 57295, under the command of Captain Benjamin Maxwell, responded to a distress call from Setlik III. Now, other dates list this as 2362. Setlik was a UFP colony world, however. The Obsidian Order suspected it was housing a military base. The Starfleet denies it ever was, and no evidence was found to support the Cardassians' claims. Gul Enkoa attacked the colony before Central Command could devise a plan of action. A ground assault was ordered with the goal to annex the system and install their own base, while depriving the Federation of a military asset. Communications were down when the Rutledge arrived, and the goal became evacuation of the settlers. The Cardassians, for their part, believed they were storming a military base, thanks to the manufactured evidence found by the Obsidian Order. In order to buy time for a massive evacuation, and with only 24 officers at their disposal, Miles O'Brien devised a plan of attack against the Cardassian Barrica encampment. This attack worked, and threw the Cardassians into disarray as they pursued the Starfleet teams. However, O'Brien was also an engineer with a specialty in transporters, and had managed to rig a field transporter system in advance to beam the attack teams around, evading capture and confusing the Cardassian forces. While doing this, captured civilians were also freed and beamed away to join the evacuation efforts of the Rutledge. However, not all made it out, and both the away teams and evacuees suffered many casualties. For his part in devising and executing the plan, Miles O'Brien was promoted to the tactical officer position by Maxwell and earned the moniker the Hero of Setlik III. O'Brien would remember it as the event where he was forced to kill for the first time, something that would trouble him for decades to come. While not the first skirmish, the scale of this marked one of the earliest conflicts in what would become the wars. 3 years later, Dorvan 5 was settled by human colonists of Native American descent. This was uncomfortably close to the border for the Federation, who warned them that this planet was being eyed up by the Cardassians for some time for its resources and as a potential colony site. The presence of a human colony there, the Federation established or not, added fuel to the fire as the Union watched even more planets that it saw as theirs become absorbed by proxy. As the war built, on the Cardassian side of things, leaders such as Gul Evek of the Fourth Order rose to prominence, with his command being regarded as one of the most auspicious postings. His own exploits were further fueled by anger when he lost both his sons to a Federation victory in the Rabok Nebula. The USS Cairo NCC 42136 was attacked by Cardassians when it was conducting surveys at the border in 2354. By this stage, it seems a state of war had been declared by the UFP. Admiral Elena Nechayev was a flag officer who oversaw a swath of operations along the Cardassian-UFP border. She took that role due to her history in both Starfleet intelligence and as a captain. She had been an admiral since around 2341 and keeping a watchful eye on her sectors, so when the Cardassian skirmishes escalated into full-scale invasions, she was one of the first to present a series of counter-initiatives. However, one of the earliest efforts was to end the skirmishes in peace talks in Sector 21503. This was assigned to the USS Stargazer under Captain Picard in 2355. However, his overtures of peace were ignored and the Stargazer was fired upon. He managed to retreat, but it seems that the Cardassian Union was not interested in talking. While the Stargazer and Picard would see occasional action against the Cardassians, the majority of his missions appeared to be more along the standard Starfleet fare of diplomacy, exploration, and mediation around the Alpha Quadrant. Starfleet, although taking it seriously, was very much regarding this war as only one of its spinning plates. In 2356, the Cardassians moved to attack the Utreya system when they came across the USS Albertani, or more accurately, its away team of Admiral Paris and Lieutenant Junior Grade Catherine Janeway. They captured the Admiral and Science Officer, but the officers were saved. After their escape, the way Janeway handled herself prompted Admiral Paris to suggest she switch to command and pursue her own captaincy. Around this time too, Janeway was trapped groundside in a protracted 3-day battle against the Cardassians, who were attacking a Starfleet outpost. While the combat raged, she notes that they managed to save the life of a wounded Cardassian despite him being the enemy, and while ultimately they drove off the attackers, Janeway recalls this as a moment of pride in her career. In 2360, operations against the Cardassian Union were in full swing, and ships like the Cairo and Rutledge were frequently deployed under Nechayev's oversight into combat zones. This represented an escalation within the Federation as the conflicts dragged on. The gulf between Starfleet and Cardassian technology was becoming more evident, but the Cardassians were fully committed to this endeavour, sending multiple wings of Galor-class cruisers against a single Starfleet ship to weigh the odds. Starfleet was still reluctant to divert all their attention to combat, with new exploration initiatives underway, the upcoming launch of the Galaxy class, and other skirmishes such as the Talarian-Galen Border Wars conflict. but they began to realise that the war needed to come to a close soon. With more focus on the Cardassians now, Starfleet effectively brought the war to a stalemate, and active battles began to subside between this time and 2366. While still at war, Cardassian advancements into UFP space were always countered with Starfleet operations either halting their advance or trading systems as they took back something else. The armistice was broached in 2367 and finalised in 2370, forming the demilitarised zone and establishing a new territorial border between the UFP and Cardassia, much as they had done with the Romulans 2 centuries before. A lot of the actual negotiations were conducted by Captain Edward Jellicoe, who had a lot of experience with the Cardassians in their military operations, from tactical insights to an understanding of their political plays. But during this time, there were a number of ghosts that reared their head, such as the USS Denver hitting a Cardassian minefield left over from the war, and the more egregious actions of Benjamin Maxwell and the USS Phoenix. On the Cardassian side of things too, well, there were plans to invade Minos Corva and the Igo sector, even while engaged in peace talks with the Federation. These talks were fraught with belligerent behaviour, and often the standard operation during this time was to goad Starfleet into taking rash action, while maintaining an air of civility so that they could claim the Federation was not acting in good faith, reinforcing Cardassian opinions that the UFP was just another aggressor like all the others they shared a border with. In 2370, the new D.M.Z. handed over planets that were originally Federation colonies to Cardassia and gave over several Cardassian planets, meaning that citizens of those worlds would have to relocate. Now, many believed that the UFP gave up too much in this trade, which led to the creation of the rebel cells of the Maquis, continuing the fight against Cardassia and forcing the Federation to disown them. Part of the Cardassians' retreat was their giving up of Bajor, which immediately petitioned the UFP for aid, but it showed just how much the war had taxed them. Despite the bravado, the Union needed the war to end too. But of course their troubles would not stop there, with the Klingons declaring war on them not even 2 years later. But so ended the Cardassian border conflict. This time saw many scars linger in the Federation, but it was far from the demoralising and paradigm-shifting event that the Dominion, or Borg, caused. This was a battle Starfleet was unwilling to commit to, because many of the worlds in the crossfire were civilian locations, and when they finally did double down on the Cardassian attacks, their interest was not in pushing them all the way back to Cardassia, but in just restoring peace. I'm saying that Starfleet could have overwhelmed the opposition, but chose not to, because Starfleet is not predominantly an army at its core. Seeing how desperate the Cardassians were, however, and their history with Starfleet, it's no surprise that they eventually allied with the Dominion, but this is a different tale that ends even worse for the besieged people of Cardassia. I've been Rick. Until the next one, thanks for watching, and goodbye.